Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this April 7th, 2021 meeting of the North Carolina State Board of Education. I'm Eric Davis, Chair of the Board, and call this meeting to order. I welcome our board members and advisors, staff, visitors, online listeners, and Twitter followers. And for our visitors and those listening online, our committee meetings and reports will span 2 days. Tomorrow's meeting will include voting on any items needing action. As of today, nearly 2/3 of this school year is complete. Despite COVID-19's challenges, North Carolina's public schools have answered the challenge to provide educational opportunities for students, both in person and remotely. Traditional calendar schools are approaching the end of the school year, preparing for many exciting and sometimes hectic events that will be cherished by students, families, and educators for a lifetime. While these events no doubt will be different than in pre-pandemic years, they will be celebrated even more with the sure knowledge that when we work together, united, we can overcome any challenge and emerge stronger. In the days ahead, it's important that we continue to display that resiliency and determination that lies within each one of us, that was passed on to us by those who built this great state. This summer, we began the long uphill climb to restore and rebuild our students' education, and with it, their future success in continuing to make our state more prosperous, more just, and fairer, in which all students have the opportunity to reach their full potential as contributing members of our society. With the recent passing of legislation affirming our state's commitment to elevating our students' literacy skills and requiring summer school, the board will look to the superintendent and senior DPI leadership to present their plans and recommendations to inform policy decisions to speed learning recovery and to ensure an effective implementation and support to all of our public school students. Our next meeting, which will be held on May 11th through 13th, includes our semi-annual planning and work session. This will be a great opportunity for the state board, superintendent, and senior DPI leadership to engage in the work of creating one team with one mission, with one common student-centered focus, with consistent and effective processes that leverage the talents, energy, and creativity of every member of the agency. This work is too important, too complex, and too vital to our students' future to not include every member of the team. We know that the best solutions come from those who have served or are serving closest to our students. We'll also have an opportunity to embrace our own accountability through the statewide dashboard to track metrics set in the strategic plan approved in 2019. I hope that all of my colleagues on the board and all senior staff, including directors, will take every action available to enable as many of us, if not all of us, to attend the May meeting in person as we gather together, socially distanced, wearing masks, to engage as a team in this most important event. The May planning and work session will be held in this building at DPI. The regular State Board of Education meeting will be preceded by a full-day working session. On the Wednesday and Thursday of that week, we'll combine our regular business with other learning opportunities. Board members are reminded that it's our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this board. Does any member of the board know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict respecting any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record. And if during the course of the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. Board members, you've seen the agenda for over a week and had the opportunity to review it. I ask if there are any requests for changes to the agenda. If not, I request a motion for approval.
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Kamnitz, second by Ms. White. Dr. Townsend Smith, we call the roll to capture the vote.
Yes, sir. Ms. Kamnitz,
Yes.
Dr. Tiptree. Yes. State Treasurer Falwell,
Aye.
Ms. White,
Yes.
Ford,
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor,
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan,
Yes.
Chair Davis.
Yes. Motion carries. We have an agenda. Thank you, colleagues. We'll now proceed to today's committee reports, and I note to the committee chairs and audience that all voting on consent and any item requiring action will be completed tomorrow via roll call. I'll now recognize Ms. Kamnitz, Chair of the Student Learning and Achievement Committee. Ms. Kamnitz.
Thank you, Chair Davis. And I share the leadership of this committee with Dr. Olivia Oxendine. We begin with a K-3 literacy update. Our children need to read. In order to be successful in all other subjects, they need to be proficient in reading by the end of third grade. If they are not, their ability to accept academic challenges, pursue their chosen path after graduation, and become lifelong learners in a globally collaborative society is impaired. North Carolina loses as well. In the spring of 2019, in response to reading proficiency scores that were not improving, the state board went to work. We knew that teachers were as disheartened as we were by the lack of reading progress, and we needed to support them with knowledge and skills to improve instruction. The board adopted a 9-point framework for improving early literacy. DPI was charged with developing action steps for each of the priorities. In addition, a literacy task force was formed and tasked with making recommendations for modifications to educator preparation and licensure to support the improvement of K-3 reading instruction. Included in that work was crafting a definition of high-quality reading instruction that goes beyond phonics instruction to include the acquisition of language, phonological and phonemic awareness, accurate and efficient word identification and spelling, world knowledge, and comprehension. That definition is grounded in the science of reading, a body of research that has deepened our understanding of how children learn to read. During the past 2 years, we have learned from states that are seeing strong reading growth where instruction is guided by the science of reading. We know from them that to be successful, there must be close alignment between the 3 branches of government, along with support from education partners, philanthropy, and the business community. It is our strength that this alignment exists in North Carolina. We appreciate the work of the General Assembly for its recent legislation, which supports our work, unifying our approach to address the reading needs of our students through the science of reading. We look forward to increased collaboration with the legislature on future actions to improve our children's education. This is another step towards meeting the goals outlined in our strategic plan and in Superintendent Truitt's Polaris plan, which we will hear more about tomorrow. Most importantly, this is a step toward improving our students' reading ability and with that, their future opportunities. I'll now turn to Dr. Amy Ryan for our regular K-3 literacy update.
Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. Good morning, Chair Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, Superintendent Truitt, Lieutenant Governor Robinson, members of the board, colleagues, and stakeholders. Thank you for your time today as we provide our April literacy update and next steps, focusing specifically on where we are with the science of reading training plan. As we continue to move forward with the work, our goal is to remain in alignment to the state board's vision, mission, and goals. Furthermore, we are ensuring that our efforts fall within the elements of the State Board Collaborative Guiding Framework, as well as the superintendent's vision. While the science of reading can be integrated throughout the framework, the key purpose of today falls within element 7, exploring a statewide system of training in reading for teachers, principals, and reading coaches on the science of reading. Some of our foundational work related to Element 7 falls within Element 6 and 9. Element 6 focuses on providing high-quality reading curriculum and instructional materials. Some of the foundational work we have started includes the creation and approval of the CPRA, as well as additional webinars and aligned resources within the virtual space of support. Element 9 focuses on our youngest learners and the importance of a solid foundational start with seamless transitions. After the approval of the updates of NCELI, OEL worked closely over the last year with DHHS and Teaching Strategies Gold to provide an aligned platform between all pre-K and kinder classrooms to ensure the instruction and assessment created a seamless approach for ongoing progress monitoring and data collection to support what typically has been a transitional gap year. And we are excited for the additional focus of layering in Element 7 as we include science reading training for all PSU and NC pre-K teachers as we continue to bolster our initial efforts. Recently, House Bill 196 included language to help support our efforts and bring this vision to fruition. This bill names Voyager Focused Learning Incorporated as a provider for professional development for pre-K through grade 5 educators. Letters is a research-based professional development opportunity that provides teachers with the skills they need to master the fundamentals of reading instruction, including phonological awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, comprehension, writing, and language. It is relevant and applicable regardless of various literacy programs or curriculum already being implemented. It is backed with more than 30 years of research and more than a decade of proven success. Letters training will be offered to teachers, coaches, and administrators to support the continuum of educator support within a school. Teachers will receive an extensive, in-depth training in 8 units to address the essential components of reading instruction, as well as the foundational concepts that link to each component. The training is offered through a blended model. Administrator training is more of a general overview and focuses on how to provide a support system aligned to the 8 units, including resources as well as data and accountability data tools. Recognizing that the training plan with aligned funding would have to involve a cohort phasing process, we wanted to be sure to provide as much voice and choice as possible for our district. A survey was sent to all RTA contacts and chief academic officers, seeking their level of interest in being a part of the first cohort starting this summer. Data was collected and reviewed to create a draft cohort plan based on interest and funding. A draft timeline was also created for each cohort as we continue to ensure everyone has the same opportunity. Our RCMs, our regional case managers, are reviewing the list assigned to their region to provide any additional feedback that we may have overlooked. And once this step is complete, we are one step closer to notifying the district. We have also had an initial discussion with DHHS with a general overview and plan to meet for next steps. At this time, I want to make sure I haven't missed anything or ask Superintendent if she has any additional comments.
No, thank you so much, Amy. I appreciate the presentation.
Questions from colleagues? Thank you, Dr. Ryan. This is another exciting step forward in this work.
Thank you.
I'll now turn to Dr. Howard. This is also an item of new business, testing and accountability updates.
Good morning, and thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. We come to you this morning, of course, with good news with respect to the federal waiver that I'm sure everyone is aware of, that on March 26th, the U.S. Department of Education did approve North Carolina's request for a waiver from accountability, school identifications, and some of the reporting requirements for the 2020-21 school year. And as we had anticipated, we were not required to do an additional public comment period. So with that in mind, the next step, of course, is possible waiver of state statutes that align to the components of the federal waiver. And of course, this is some of the required reporting in the North Carolina School Report Card, the calculation and reporting of the school performance grades, and the identification of schools needing support and improvement. So on the next 6 slides, we're going to look first at each of these areas with respect to the federal waiver, and then we're going to look at the state statutes that are currently in place that would need to be addressed for this school year. So in the federal waiver, the annual school report card requirements are waived, and this includes the accountability system description, other academic indicator results, school quality or student success indicator results, and progress toward meeting long-term goals and measurements of interim progress. So the aligned state statutes that should also be considered at this point, given the federal waiver, are on slide 5. And we can see here, the first one is the encompassing annual report card for state and public school units. And there are also then parallel laws that address charter schools, regional schools, and lab schools. So also included in the federal waiver is the calculation of the school performance grades, the A through F system, which is the designation for each school based on accountability measures that include statewide assessments and other indicators. So the alignment to the state statutes is in 115C 83.15, the calculation of the school performance grades, and 115C 83.16, the use of the school performance grades to meet federal ESSA requirements, and of course, the accountability model that is specifically designed for alternative schools. And then the last piece is the identification of comprehensive support and improvement schools and targeted support and improvement schools. These are waived by the U.S. Department of Education for the current school year. However, the state must maintain the current designations, and we are in a timeline to have new identifications in the fall of 2022 that would be based on test data from the 2021-22 school year. So again, aligned to this in state law are the identification of all low-performing schools, continually low-performing schools, low-performing local school administration units, and low-performing charter schools. And the citations that are on that slide address each of those individually. So it is, so with all of these, there is a bill has been filed in the Senate, Senate Bill 654, that addresses all of these areas. So we will continue to see the progress of that bill over the next several days or weeks. So with that, I'll pause and if there are any questions or any additional information that we could provide.
Questions? Mr. Duncan.
My understanding is that the test at the end of the year is still required. Is that right?
Yes. Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan. I appreciate that clarification. Yes, there was not a federal waiver for the administration of the federally required assessments. So that would be grades 3 through 8, reading and math, grades 5 and 8, science, and then the 4 end of course assessments that are administered in the high schools.
Those tests have traditionally not allowed to be held remotely. Has there been any guidance on that? And I'm really asking these questions for the public. I know the answers, but I think it's important that they get out there.
Okay, well, we most appreciate that. So we had many conversations about remote administration starting back in the fall. And the final decision in North Carolina was not to pursue remote administrations at this time, primarily around 2 areas. One is the placing that on parents and other caregivers to oversee those administrations of those assessments, and then the security of the assessments as well, to have to maintain that in the home might actually lead to some invasive potentially perceived invasive practices, such as visual monitoring, other things of that nature. So there are a couple of states that are looking at doing that, but even in the past couple of weeks, some states that have said we're going to try it have kind of backed off a little bit. So while we recognize that this may be an area that we need to continue to pursue in the future, particularly given the changing circumstances in our world, it's not something that we can fully support at this time.
Thank you.
Other questions? Hearing none, thank you, Dr.
Jill.
Howard. That is
Jill.
indeed good news.
Jill?
Oh, sorry, Chair Davis.
So, thank you, Ms. Camden. So one tag on to Vice Chairman's question is, and I've received a number of emails of great interest from students and parents about the weight of the assessments towards student grades. That does not appear on this presentation, so it seems to still be an open item whether the board will consider anything different. I guess we would look to the superintendent and staff for an appropriate recommendation on that issue for us to consider. And we probably should do that pretty quickly, given that it's April. So is that something we can look to your team, Superintendent?
Absolutely. We'll be happy to provide a recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair Davis. That's a very good question. All right. Thank you, Dr. Howard.
Thank you.
Moving on to our discussion items, SLA 1 is the Governor's School Board of Governors appointment recommendations. I believe that is either Ms. Thomas or Mr. Winton.
Yes, good morning. This is Sherry Thomas, Director of the Exceptional Children Division. Good morning to board members, Superintendent Truitt, Lieutenant Governor Robinson, and Treasurer Falwell. You have before you a list of the North Carolina Governor's School Board of Governors. We have 3 positions that are up for a reappointment for a second term, and they have all agreed to do that. We have 3 vacancies that we are looking to fill. These would become, I believe, in effect on July 1. We have provided a few recommendations to Superintendent Truitt for her review. We are continuing to collect interested folks that might want to fill these positions. In particular, we're looking for a representative from the Sandhills region, the Northwest region, and then we have a 3rd regional position that is not regional specific. So it could be from anywhere across the state. So we will hopefully have all those recommendations to Superintendent Truitt and bring this back to you next month for further discussion, review, and vote on these positions. I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Any questions for Ms. Thomas? Thank you, Ms. Thomas. We'll look forward to seeing who steps up to serve on that important board.
Thank you.
SLA 2, the State Advisory Council on American Indian Education Annual Report. I think we look forward to this every year. I believe Dr. Lockler is going to provide us with that.
Good morning. This is Susan Silver. Good morning, Chairman Davis, Superintendent Truitt, Lieutenant Governor Robinson, and all members of the board and colleagues. My name is Susan Silver. I lead diagnostic services within the agency, which is currently under district and regional support. In addition, I serve as a liaison to the agency's liaison to the State Advisory Council on Indian Education. And so it's in that capacity that I come to you today. I'd be remiss if I didn't say I'm a member of the Hollawassa Pony Tribe and a product of Indian education and cultural programming. So this part of my work is deeply rooted in me and something I take great pleasure and pride in working with. SACE, as part of its legislative mandate, provides an annual report to the State Board of Education. Also supporting the State Advisory Council on Indian Education, serving as the board's liaison to the agency, is Dr. Oxendine. At this time, I am going to turn it over to the safety chairwoman, which is Dr. Tiffany Lockler. She is currently an assistant professor within the School of Education at UNC Pembroke and is completing her first term as the safety chairwoman and has done a wonderful job thus far. So at this time, I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Lockler.
Thank you, Dr. Silver. Good morning, Chairman Davis, Superintendent Truitt, Lieutenant Governor Robinson, State Board members, and all other stakeholders. On behalf of the State Advisory Council on Indian Education, I am pleased to present to you this vital work, the 2021 Annual Report to the North Carolina State Board of Education. This report is all-embracing and certainly highlights the continued need for educational equity for American Indian students. The mission of the Executive Advisory Council on Indian Education is to create a system that engages state policy leaders, public school personnel, parents, tribal leaders, and communities in providing educational experiences and cultural opportunities that promote high expectations and accountability for the academic achievement of American Indian students, thus preparing students for success in a globally competitive environment. Our mission is that every American Indian student in North Carolina will graduate from academically rigorous and culturally relevant high schools as well-prepared lifelong learners, globally competitive for work and post-secondary education. The 2021 report theme is American Indian Resilience, Advancing Educational Equity for Our Students During a Pandemic. As a result of the pandemic, educational reform is certainly apparent. This provides a dynamic opportunity to advance educational equity within our districts and schools. As educators respond to and transform pedagogy, we continue to highlight the achievement gaps that exist for American Indian students. This work aligns with the Public Education Equity Resolution goal to eliminate opportunity gaps by 2025. It is important to note that the 2019-2020 data for EOGs and EOCs are not available due to COVID-19. Therefore, that data is not included in the report, while the Council wanted to see if there were any trends that if we looked at subgroup data by grade level for EOGs and gender for EOCs. And so this data set did not yield any significant findings. So in the area of EOG reading across grade levels, there is a gap between American Indian student performance and the state average. That gap is more pronounced between American Indian students and their white peers. There's a significant amount of variance in student performance across grade levels over a 3-year period. In the area of EOG math across grade levels, there's a gap between American Indian student performance and a state average. That gap is more pronounced between American Indian students and their white peers. With the exception of grade 4, American Indian students demonstrated growth in math proficiency over the course of 3 years. As it relates to the EOC, American Indian female students consistently outperform their male American Indian peers in all 3 areas, most significantly on English 2 EOC assessments. As it relates to the ACT, SAT, and AP, the ACT, American Indian students had an average of 2 7/10 points lower than the state average. In the area of the SAT, the rate of American Indian students taking that exam was below the participation rate from 2018-2019, and American Indian students scored 7 points lower in 2019-2020 than in the previous academic year. And as it relates to the AP, the percentage of students taking AP exams decreased for all students in the state, and the number of American Indian students taking the AP exams increased. However, they had the second lowest AP exam participation. American Indian students' rates of proficiency and growth are significantly higher in science than in reading and math across grade levels. Gaps in proficiency rates between American Indian students and the state average and their white peers are much smaller. Cohort graduation rates have steadily increased over a 3-year period. Dropout rates have increased at a higher rate among American Indian males while decreasing for all their peers. And rates of suspension have decreased over a 3-year period. Suspension rates remain significantly higher for Black students and disproportionately higher for American Indian students than their white peers. In collaboration with the Native Education Collaborative, making Native education a shared priority, North Carolina was one of 4 states to participate in a pilot program led by the National Comprehensive Center, and that pilot launched November 2020. The other 3 states in that pilot were Washington, Oklahoma, and Idaho. The National Center is part of the United States Department of Education Comprehensive Center Network that works with states and regional centers to deliver universal and targeted capacity building services. And their goal is to identify key categories of support for American Indian students, resulting in a plan of action. So circles of reflection were held. There was a facilitated process of reflection which included DPI senior leadership, and it also included SACE members, American Indian educators, and tribal leadership. With that being said, there were 3 identified priorities for North Carolina. 1 being effective teachers and leaders. Number 2, native culture and language. And 3, tribal consultation and sovereignty. So our first one was effective teachers and leaders, and this chart is here before you. And we looked at these as with a lens of priority and opportunity. So most of these were high priority long-term, such as the state encouraging and supporting the recruitment of Native students to serve as future leaders or teachers and school administrators, and looking at our college prep programs. Our second area was native culture and language, and here we see a mixture of high priority long-term and medium priority long-term, and then we also have a high priority short-term, and that one is that the state encourages and supports the implementation of effective practices of culturally responsive or culture-based teaching and assessment. And tribal consultation and sovereignty, again, there's a mixture here. I do want to highlight the high priority short term, which are the state supports LEAs to achieve significant tribal consultation in school planning and budgeting, and that the state tracks and monitors tribal consultations in the LEA and school planning and budgeting. So given the data, the North Carolina State Advisory Council on Indian Education recommends that DPI work closely with school districts and Title VI Indian education coordinators to implement SIT's recommendations. Before proceeding with these recommendations, I would like to note that Dr. Oxendine was crucial to this process and worked collaboratively with Dr. Silver, myself, and other state advisory members to develop each recommendation. Our recommendation 1 is, as part of the State Board of Education vision for opportunity equity, establish a department level position dedicated to consultation with and coordination across all entities whose missions seek to improve educational opportunities for American Indian students. This recommendation is consistent with requirements secured by the Every Student Succeeds Act, which requires collaboration and consultation with districts, state and federal tribes, higher education, critical state organizations, and the Department of Public Instruction. And it is important to note that this recommendation does align with the State Board Equity Resolution. Recommendation 2 is to ensure senior leadership who participated in the National Center American Indian and Alaska Native Education Project Circle of Reflection pilot acts on those recommendations, prioritized in the 3 areas that we just discussed: Native culture and language, tribal consultation and sovereignty, and targeted DPI efforts to recruit effective American Indian teachers and leaders. Recommendation 3 also is in alignment with the state's equity resolution, and that recommendation is to implement formal protocols to ensure DPI collaboration and consultation with SACE regarding the revisions of content standards. Consultation will include the development of 21st century instructional resources that specifically reference American Indian history, the current affairs of culture, and the expansion of innovative programs by similar to the Native Voices piloted by DPI. Recommendation 4 centers around the COVID pandemic, and the COVID pandemic has created new challenges that have revealed deeply rooted barriers to increase student achievement, most noticeably inequitable access to technology. So to this end, SACE recommends the following: to increase advocacy for access to broadband internet, both in students' homes and schools, particularly in rural areas and tribal communities; to increase digital literacy efforts to ensure American Indian students can successfully engage in an increasingly virtual world; and ensure that COVID relief dollars adequately address gaps resulting from learning loss during the 12-month course of school closure. State and federal dollars should support recovery in reading, mathematics, and comprehensive services in social emotional learning. Mitigating the long-term impact of the 2020 pandemic on the education of American Indian students must remain paramount. Recommendation 5 urges all public school administrators and boards of education to review and implement local policies related to the selection of athletic mascots, and to educate all school personnel on the long-term damaging effects to students when inappropriate images and messages dishonor the American Indian culture. And in the SACE report in Appendix H, there is an update on American Indian mascot use in the North Carolina public schools, and that updated information revealed that 34 schools still have American Indian themed logos or mascots. SACE does believe that this type of imagery is detrimental to the development of positive self-images among American Indian students, and very harmful to the ways in which the American Indian community is perceived by non-native students and staff. Again, this recommendation aligns with the equity resolution that was passed by the State Board. Our final recommendation, recommendation 6, explores new venues for disseminating the self-paced modules titled Culturally Responsive Teaching About American Indians. This resource aligns with North Carolina Teaching Standard 2. The models will ensure that all educators have access to instructional resources that teach about and celebrate state and federal American Indian tribes, their histories, and their achievements. Culturally responsive teachers are the greatest assets in raising the achievement of American Indian students. There are certainly those who make a huge difference. Therefore, we would like to acknowledge the North Carolina State Board of Education, the North Carolina Commission of Indian Affairs, DPI staff, the National Comprehensive Center, and SACE members. These teams are the reason we are able to launch such an explicit report each and every year. Thanks to each division indeed. In closure, state board members remain committed to our mission and the tribal communities that we serve. Our purpose is supported by a vision. While 2021 continues to embark on uncharted trajectories, we are faithful to continuing this most important work. At this time, I welcome any questions or discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Locklear. Any questions from my colleagues?
Madam Chair, I don't have a question, but I have a comment. Is it okay?
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Ford.
All right, excellent. Dr. Locklear, one is I just wanted to say welcome and thank you for assuming this position and doing the work. Always grateful to hear these reports from SACE and just think it's so imperative and important that we, concentrate on the very specific needs of our Native American Indian students. And so thank you for that. I guess the comment I have is to fellow board members. I think that, we have a long way to go, but I'm encouraged by what appears to be some very real alignment. And I appreciate you, Dr. Locklear, for continuing to, refrain back to the equity resolution and the strategic plan. There's a lot of overlap there. And if anything, that lets me know that even though we have a lot of action, we appear to be on the right track, specifically around culturally relevant and responsive teaching practices, recruiting diverse teachers, specifically Native American teachers as well, increasing the knowledge of culture. All these things are hugely important. And just we stand in solidarity with you on these needs. I did want to call out one of the recommendations, recommendation number 5, and to say that I think that this is a ripe area for us to concentrate on. This notion of urging public school administrators and boards to review, implement policies, but most specifically mascots. And I believe you said 30 plus at mascots that are Native mascots still are around in North Carolina, and it's SACE's position these have a diminishing or negative effect on students. And so just wanted to call that out, board members, to say that as we try to operationalize these reports so that they don't remain static, this seems like a very fitting area to begin some of our advocacy. And so I thank you once again. Thank you, Dr. Locklear.
Thank you, Dr. Ford, for that feedback.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. Dr. Oxendine.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. And it feels so good to be back in my spot today. After a year, I'm just getting in the real feel of things. I do want to say, I can't say thank you enough to SACE for the hard work that this council has given to the needs of American Indian students in North Carolina since 1988. 1988, that is worth underscoring. The SACE has just become more engaged and more focused on the heart and meat of what it's going to take for our American Indian students to do well in school in terms of outcomes on tests, in terms of really building a robust curriculum that is culturally relevant, engaging across the state recognized tribes as well as our one federal tribe, the Eastern Band of Cherokee. I would say to the state board, my colleagues around the state board table, and those of you who are listening online, as well as the Department of Public Instruction, please join SACE. The council has put forward a very ambitious slate of recommendations. And SACE can't do it alone. SACE is going to need the Department of Public Instruction, already has the Department of Public Instruction. Already, the curriculum area of DPI has built into their procedures manual the wording, the specific wording that SACE will always be a partner in the redesign and the rethinking and the revising of curricula and standards. That is a huge step forward, a huge step forward. So what I would say is, as we embark on Mr. Ford just highlighted recommendation 5. As we embark on recommendation 5 around the mascots and logos, and I think Dr. Locklear mentioned 34 school systems still promote Native American logos, mascots. That's going to be challenging work. It really is. And it's going to really challenge our LEAs and our communities to rethink this issue. The board, the state board must be joined closely with SACE as we embark on number 5, as we embark on all of the recommendations, but specifically that one. I'm very proud of SACE. Again, I'm very proud of all the partners that work with SACE, the North Carolina Indian Commission, and the various tribes around the state to put forward this report that is in legislation. So again, and thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. I took too much time.
Your comments are very important in this arena. Yes, Vice Chair Duncan.
I'm also going to ask a question ultimately about recommendation 5. We went through in Guilford County 15 or so years ago. There were between elementary, middle, and high schools, there were, if memory serves, somewhere around 6 that had mascots that were in some way Indian themed. And we went through the process and had a number of hearings and discussions and went through the process ultimately of changing those names and changing those mascots. As Dr. Oxendine referred to, it's a very difficult issue because there tends to be some community involvement and attachment to what have been traditional names. The interesting part to me in our county was for Southern Guilford High School, which is Guilford County does not have a huge Native American population like, say, Robinson County does, but still has some real historic traditions and many citizens who do have that heritage. The Revels family, who many of you may know, extremely prominent in Guilford County for the work that they've done. And there was a great deal of resistance changing the name from Southern Guilford Indians. It was brought forward by the Native American community in that area. And so I ask if we're to be good leaders and good supporters of this effort, what suggestions the council may have to address that issue or concern as we listen to all citizens about their thoughts on these issues, that it would be helpful to get some further thinking or thoughts about that, because I suspect some LEAs will run into that very same concern that many citizens thought it honored their heritage, and that was important to them. And so I raise that issue just because it is important when we be equity lens focused. And in doing that, I think some further thoughts and advice from the council would be most appreciated, I suspect, by the LEAs.
Superintendent Truitt.
Thank you. And to follow up on that question, how does the council feel about schools that have American Indian names that are named for tribes? And is that separate? Is that a separate issue from a mascot?
Dr. Locklear, would you like to speak to that?
Sure. Are you asking, or let me clarify the question. Are you asking if American Indian schools having mascots, is that okay? Is that what you're asking?
I'm asking if a school, for example, there's an elementary school in Johnston County called Powhatan Elementary. Does that need to be changed?
I think that any mascot in a community that it's not representative of, it's a mascot rather than being a representative of that community, then it is detrimental to the development of that community or any American Indian students within that school. And it creates a negative imagery for those students. So yes, I would suggest looking into those and possibly getting those mascots changed.
So what if it's not a mascot, but the name of the school?
I think those two things coincide. The mascot. I think the two things coincide with each other.
Perhaps that's something that Stacy could examine for us and give us some guidance on.
Absolutely. The council is happy to provide further guidance in that area.
Anna, they can't hear me.
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, Superintendent Stewart, did you have a follow-up?
My follow-up is just
Hear me
that
okay?
the department, as we continue to build out the Office of Equity and we look to hire a Director of Equity Affairs, we look forward to taking the recommendations of the SACE Council and ensuring that there is equity for all.
Can you hear my voice?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I'll stay. Thank
Right.
you.
Good morning,
Any
Kimberly.
other questions on this report from our
Judge
veterinary partner and a very important voice as we continue to work
A lot of areas.
on behalf of our American Indian students?
So I won't-
Vice Chair Davis.
My question.
If we go back to the slides that have the,
Stuart
either of
touched
the
on
slides
it
that have the
last
data.
Treasurer Falwell.
Yes.
About whether you're running from something or to. Did you have any more to add?
Treasurer Falwell, I'm going to mute you as we hear you talking in the background, so we're going to mute you, okay?
Let me go down to Chris's office.
So, agreeing with the superintendent on the goal of equity for all, any of these data slides will show the tremendous work we have ahead of us to deliver on our constitutional responsibility for American Indian students. I've sat on this board now, I forget how many years. I've always heard this report, always had a good feeling. There's not meaningful change. Not the change that we need. And yet, you can say the same thing about African American and Hispanic students. Good intentions, lack of meaningful change. I think this Stacy report to me shows some concrete steps, recommendations to take to move the dial. I wonder how much of this model serving American Indian students we keep, we strengthen, we build on, and in fact, we expand to all students who are not serving as well. Recommendations in this report, I think, could quite easily be applied to our African American or Hispanic students or others marginalized in the past who haven't been well served by our system. And it's imperative that we serve them now. So I really, more than any other year that I've heard this report, I really appreciate this report this year because it highlights the work that we must do for American Indian students and build on it to serve all students. Thank you, Ms. Cammons.
Thank you, Chair Davis. And as Dr. Lockler pointed out, it's exactly what we have set out to do with our strategic plan and our equity resolution. But this helps remind us of the job ahead, of how much is left to do. Any other questions?
This is Mariah Morris, and I have a comment.
Yes, go ahead, Ms. Morris.
Thank you for this wonderful report. This was a really great overview of where we are. And I just want to grade this report with our first report on our reading in our early grades that we heard earlier, and ask the department if there is any intentional analysis of the unique needs of our Indian students or teachers when looking at early grades literacy, because I think that when we grade these two together, we'll find that there's definitely not, one magic bullet, and we're going to have to be very culturally responsive to the unique needs of this community.
Good point, Ms. Morris. Thank you. Hearing no other questions, thank you so much, Dr. Locklear. And moving on to 3 items that are all State Board of Education policy amendments. SLA 3 and 4 are brought to us by Ms. Shaw Coltrane. course for credit amendment and an advanced courses satisfying graduation requirement amendment. Ms. Shaw Coltrane.
Thank you, Ms. Chemnitz. Hello, everybody. Good morning. Happy Wednesday. What I bring to you today is some cross-agency policies that needed to be updated after we changed our graduation requirements, especially for social studies in light of the legislation. For course for credit, 001, which really kind of sets the stage for how we provide credit for high school courses in our North Carolina public schools. So it has a lot of information in this policy, from credit recovery to credit, by demonstrated mastery, etc. So what the changes that we have made are to align some of the course names to the new social studies courses. We changed middle school to prior to grade 9 because going through the rules committee, we realized that the word middle school can be defined in many different ways, high school as well. And so we wanted to clarify those courses that can be taken prior to grade 9. We also clarified all college level options, just more of a cleaning up bit. And then clarified what happens when a student does take a course earlier in their academic career, but then it may not necessarily be a specific graduation course core requirement for when they graduate. And so looking at that, because that situation happened this year with social studies when we shifted with the EPF course. So just some cleaning up that issue. We also have another policy here, Grad 008, where we wanted to propose to you to recommend the use of AP Government and Politics to satisfy the founding principles of the United States of America and North Carolina Civic Literacy course. Both the social studies section and my team received many requests from the LEAs when this course was adopted by you all a few months ago. I've lost track of timing, but recently. And so we actually started looking at it. We did a content alignment. We also talked to teachers who submitted what they thought, how it was so well aligned and would further offer an opportunity for students to take advanced coursework. So we recommend that to the board. We did clarify in the policy itself, even though we saw the elements of the founding principles clearly in the AP course when we did the review, we did want to ensure that that legislation was clearly stated in this policy. So there were no questions whatsoever that that course, no matter what, still needed to address the various principles that are in the legislation that we already feel are confident in the course content, but did want to double verify that in our policy for that. So, and then just some other cleaning up for that. But Ms. Chemnitz, happy to take any questions.
Questions for Ms. Shaw Coltrane? Hearing none, thank you, Ms. Shaw Coltrane. And our last discussion item is SLA 5, again, a policy amendment for on the organization and administrative structure of the governor's school. Ms. Thomas.
Good morning again, board members, Superintendent Truitt, Lieutenant Governor, and listeners. We are here today to bring to you for consideration a request for State Board Policy EXCP 009. The North Carolina Governor's School is administered by the State Board of Education through the Department of Public Instruction and currently resides under the supervision of the Exceptional Children's Division. As you know, this is a a program that offers an enriching summer program to selected high-achieving and talented high school students. And we have the honor and privilege of being the very first governor's school in the country, started by Governor Terry Sanford. Previously, AIG, which it was called then, now our Advanced Learning Area or Advanced Learning Division, was under the Exceptional Children's Division as well. There was some reorganization back around 2008, and AIG, now Advanced Learning, moved under the Deputy Superintendent at that point. But that was one person, one position, not a true division. And so following Superintendent Truitt's recommendation and consideration for looking at the location of Governor's School, Shaw Coltrane and I have had discussions along with Dr. Edmonds and Dr. Stegall, and we all feel like moving the Governor's School organizationally under the Advanced Learning Division is very appropriate. It aligns with the work of that division. The Exceptional Children's Division's had a long history with this work. We will continue to support Governor's School in any way possible. We will not want to miss those face-to-face auditions that we've had the privilege and the honor of being a part of for so many years. But we also feel like this is a great opportunity to do a better alignment with advanced learning and with Governor's School. And so we bring forth to you this policy change for consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. Ms. Shaw Coltrane, do you have anything to add since this is now going to be in your department if we approve this?
Sure. Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. Ms. Thomas explained the situation really well. Thank you, Sherry. We are absolutely looking forward to this phenomenal opportunity to synergize kind of the last big advanced learning program for gifted education into this division that the last 10 years we've built here at the department to bring together AP, dual enrollment, IB, AIG, credit by demonstrated mastery, honors, and now to bring Governor's School into the family specifically, we feel like will really help to align initiatives like Sherry has already shared. And I could not be more pleased and more proud to be bringing Governor's School into our team, knowing that it's still, of course, a great program that connects to many areas in the department. But it will bring alignment, and a lot of people in the field are also incredibly supportive of this move because of communication and how so many things go out, and it'll just be clearer and more aligned. So I appreciate this opportunity and appreciate Superintendent Truitt's leadership for making this happen.
Thank you both. Any questions?
Jill.
I don't know why I'm looking that way.
I think this is a very good recommendation and makes all kinds of sense, but I don't want to miss up an opportunity to give some thanks. Meredith has been a wonderful partner for this for years and years and years, and has made an immense difference in the lives of many students who've gone there. But I want to thank Sherry Thomas and her colleagues when 2 years ago we had to make a quick change in location. An extraordinary amount of work went into that, led by Sherry and her colleagues. And we ended up, and give thanks to High Point University, who stepped forward to continue to host the second branch of Governor's School. So as we make this transition, assuming it passes, as you said, Ms. Kamnitz, I think that we should give thanks to the incredible work that's been done to get us to this place where we make this transition by those who have had very fine stewardship over the program for a long time, and give thanks to our higher education colleagues.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan. It took the village to make that work 2 years ago, and your support was invaluable, but thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right, thank you so much. It sounds like a very good change and one that makes a lot of sense. So All right, we'll see it again next month. Let's see, one final item is a consent item, two consent items, SLI 6 and SLI 7, both high school accreditation, one for Brevard High School and the other one for Rosman High School. We have seen several of these in the last few months. These are schools that have chosen to receive their accreditation through us. So any questions about either one of those? Hearing none, I will pass this back to you, Chair Davis.
Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. And just returning for just a brief moment to the first item on your agenda, it's such an important one. I would just like to add that reading is so foundational to all other subjects, and the correlation between reading proficiency and student success can never be overstated. For some time, we've seen the lack of progress, as the report noted, with achieving proficiency despite teachers' best efforts to adhere to legislative goals. The science of reading is a phrase that refers to the body of research that explains how the brain learns to read and what instructional methods work best with all students, including those with learning differences and learning to read. So as we shift from past approaches that emphasized helping struggling readers to one that addresses the underlying cause of low rates of reading proficiency across many students, we must ensure we have a comprehensive plan to translate that policy into practice. And in doing so requires comprehensive planning to ensure the appropriate parties are included and heard to change the system of literacy support across our state. And I join with you in expressing our appreciation to the three branches of government for offering their support and for working together in a common vision to address this compelling need for our students. Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. We will now move to our Strategic Planning Committee, and I'll turn to the chair of that committee, Mr. Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And once again, I'm James E. Ford, Chair of the Strategic Planning Committee. I share in leadership with partner and friend, Ms. Jill Kamnitz. And on the continuation of the topic of equity and the importance of such, I'm so grateful that within DPI we have not only areas that we can point to where there's needed growth, but also really bright spots within the department where great work is being done. You will note that last time we focused on the work, of course, of gifted education, and now we have the opportunity to talk about the work that's being done that exemplifies equity and excellence within the Exceptional Children's Division. Is to present on that work, we have none other than our very own Dr. Catherine Edmonds, Deputy Superintendent of Equity. Again, Ms. Thomas will be calling you as the director of the EP division to speak again, and the assistant director, Dr. Matt Hoskins. And so without further ado.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Ford. Good morning, Chair Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, Superintendent Truitt, Lieutenant Governor Robinson, board members, and colleagues. COVID-19 has affected us all. And as been shared earlier, the COVID-19 pandemic has magnified inequities that previously existed and has revealed barriers to increase student achievement, to include our students with disabilities. We know that the impact has been seen across and is yet to be seen the full impact that COVID-19 has had on our students with disabilities. And I would like to commend Director Sherry Thomas and her team on their approach to developing their equity and excellence strategic plan that is in alignment with Superintendent Truitt's North Star, as well as the State Board of Education's strategic plan. And as been said earlier, as we talk about equity and equity for all. And when I think about the definition that the board has developed around educational equity, it is the belief and practice of ensuring that every student is treated in a fair and just manner, providing the necessary allocation of resources for the success of every student, and eliminating discriminatory barriers to full participation and opportunities for every student. And in that spirit, when Sherry Thomas and her team share their plan, we can see, as we've said earlier, that we are looking at equity for all. So I will turn it over to Ms. Thomas and her team to share their strategic plan.
Thank you, Dr. Edmonds. Let me say that Matt and I are absolutely delighted to be here today to share this work with you that we have begun. It will never be finished, and it's a plan to get us through the next 5 years, knowing that we will adjust as needed. But we're delighted to share this with you. Next slide. As we look at equity through the lens of the exceptional children in the strategic plan, much of the foundations of federal law, including the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA as we refer to that, is founded on equity. Access to education and support is a basic tenet of this regulation, stemming back to the original special education law, which was Public Law 94-142 in 1975. As with all educational endeavors, this is complex and it's not easy work, and it's not done overnight. Actually, there are several obligations to do this work that stand before us right now: federal law, state statutes and requirements, and Leandro. So as we begin today's presentation, I want to take a moment and ensure that everyone is on the same page when we reference exceptional children. North Carolina identifies 14 eligibility categories for special education services, as provided through guidance by IDEA. In all these categories, students may have a mild, moderate, or severe disability. As we think about equity and access, no one category of eligibility is more important than the other. No level of disability is more important. All students in need of special education must have access and receive appropriate instruction and support, no matter their level of disability or their category of eligibility. So the Exceptional Children Division's previous strategic plan was developed and implemented in late 2013. It was an excellent framework for us for refocusing the work of the Exceptional Children Division. We had a new director, and it was just a good time to kind of do a refresh for our division. We increased the focus and put input on stakeholder engagement. We looked at feedback, at partnerships, at collaboration. We also moved to a regionalization model to support our public school units, aligning all the work from the division into regional teams, crossing different sections of work and creating stronger teams and stronger relationships. As we finished the previous plan, the state board was beginning to develop their current strategic plan. Our work is focused on equity and equal and appropriate access. Now, under the Office of Equity, this work truly aligns, and Exceptional Children is excited to join the work focused on the whole child. So I want to talk just a little bit about the process we went through in developing our current strategic plan. Next. We began with the state board goals, looked at the work of the division, and created our objectives, action items, and our evidence or measures of success. With outside facilitators, we worked through a problem-solving process. Trago Ed is the process we used. We've used that for the last 8 years in our division to help problem solve. We've trained staff, districts use this, so it's a familiar tool for us all to use. So we worked through that problem-solving process to create clear alignment to our work with the strategic plan. We sought stakeholder feedback and received input from EC directors, from parents, from advocacy groups and agencies, from our institutes of higher ed, and from our own division staff, because it was critical for us to ensure they saw the linkage of their work to the strategic plan for the division. Then we used that feedback to make adjustments to the plan and to move it forward. We have aligned our goals at the division and again at the section level, as we'll talk about a little bit later, because we wanted to ensure that our work, while we have so many requirements from regulations, from state board policy, from legislation, we still have to ensure the work is completed and we do our work, but our work so beautifully aligns with the strategic plan of the state board and with the vision of the superintendent. It was really very easy to make that alignment happen. We did add an additional goal to focus on. And so now I think Matt's going to talk about that alignment.
Thank you, Shane. Good morning. As always, it's a privilege to present the work of the EC division to this body. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail around some of the things that Sherry said to discuss the alignment of our strategic plan to the plan of the state board. And I also just want to say that it's particularly rewarding this morning to share this vision that's consistent with the plan of the state board and superintendent. So we're really excited to do that. So as Sherry explained, IDEA, it was really born out of strong and fierce advocacy, a lot of which was coming from parents and families in light of an educational system that denied students with disabilities a free and appropriate public education. So just as the work that we are all charged with as educators, equity is really inherent to the work of special educators. It's not a passing trend. It's been for us a moral imperative, as well as a legal obligation for decades now. And knowing all of the individuals that I've had the privilege to work with within the division across the state, in the LEAs, that the vast majority of special educators, they've chosen this profession because of their commitment to equity and their commitment to the groups of students who are the most vulnerable and those who have been historically marginalized. So as we think about how do we operationally define equity, that was one of the big things that came up as we started thinking about alignment. And as we try to operationally define that, when you have a large group of people, it's going to elicit a wide continuum of thoughts and expectations, from those that are very nuanced to possibly very large and vast differences in the conceptualization of the term. And so what we really leaned into as we did this work was the definition of the State Board of Education, to make sure that first, internally as a division, we had a common understanding of the work that we were doing related to equity. And specifically when we're talking about equity, the state board definition refers to educational equity, which is the belief and practices of ensuring that every student is treated in a fair and just manner, providing the necessary allocation of resources for the success of every student, and eliminating discriminatory barriers to full participation and opportunities for every student. So as we thought about that, there was a lot to unpack as we were thinking about our strategic plan. So the first thing that I want to talk about is that equity refers to, in this definition, both belief and practice. So as we planned our work, I think we really understood the importance of the conjunction chosen in this definition of that belief and practice. As a division, we know that we have diverse and sometimes conflicting beliefs, but we also know that we have a lot of common beliefs as a division. Particularly in special education, we rely a lot on empiricism, on data, and we also know that we have individuals who care deeply about each other and are willing to speak professionally with each other to tackle complex and difficult topics. So as you'll see, as we developed the strategic plan, we really wanted to make sure that we tackled both the beliefs that we hold as a division and what we are doing and the activities that we're doing. As we consider systems of change, as we consider implementation science, how to actually make something come to fruition within the field, we understood that first there was internal work that needed to be done. We all need to understand the why, the purpose of the work, to explore our own beliefs, and to develop a better and deeper understanding of each other as colleagues. And change requires motivation, and motivation means, which is something that we as humans are typically resistant to because we like comfort of habit and routine. We have to understand, why are we doing this work? We have to understand that this work is of value and that it can be accomplished, and that we need to also connect to the belief systems of those within our division completing the work. Hence the initial focus on internal capacity building. Second, we also understand that the definition from equity from the state board, that fair is not equal, or is not a synonym for equal, and the word just is also included in the definition. And this really falls closely in line with IDEA, as we are obligated to provide resources, and as it's described in IDEA, specially designed instruction to meet the unique needs of the student. So as we think about fair, it does not mean every student receives the same thing, and the acknowledgement that students require different resources and different supports to be successful. And as a division, I think we believe that this is the equity, the essence of equity. And then third, as we think about the definition, we're charged with not only identifying the discriminatory barriers, but also as a division, what is the work that we must engage in to eliminate them? And in the definition, it leads us that our methodology for doing so is to examine how embedded practices impact full participation and opportunities for every student. And when we consider full participation and opportunities, this compels us to consider multiple entangled factors that are associated with student success. Students that are factors that are academic in nature, but also those that encompass the whole child, including physical and mental health, nutrition, safety, a whole host of other factors that are included within the whole child model. So with all of that said, I know that this work seems daunting, but it certainly didn't think that it was unachievable. And so I'm hopeful over the next couple slides, we'll be able to talk through about how the spirit of this definition will become slightly more crystallized in the activities that we are doing within the work. So as I mentioned earlier, our division really determined that internal work and capacity building first to fully engage in the development of our own strategic plan. We started by, as a division, really closely examining the language, the goals, the objectives of the state board strategic plan, and engaging in conversations focused on equity, knowing that that was a key driver of the work. And so most specifically, what we were thinking about is, what is the need of the work that we need to do to decrease discriminatory barriers while also increasing equitable opportunities. And as we understood that discriminatory barriers are often not obvious, they're often latent types of things, we thought that it would be best to start our work focusing on implicit or unintentional bias. And so to do so, we completed the implicit association test, which is a validated assessment of bias. And when I say bias, I'm referring to thoughts and feelings that oftentimes are outside of our conscious awareness. And I do want to say that as we did this, first, we didn't require that it be completed. We encouraged staff to complete it. And in addition, all the data and the results were held private and confidential for the individual that was completing it, so that they didn't need to share it with anybody else. And then following that, we developed a virtual platform that we could provide anonymous reflections to be shared, and then open the floor for a virtual conversation to discuss, hey, what did we find out as we were looking through the results of these assessments? And the real purpose of this, as I said earlier, was to develop that compelling why for acknowledging our own needs to grow and to fully engage and work around equity. And based on that exercise, we determined that there were two key areas that we wanted to focus on that included race and disability. I think as a division, we had a lot of good conversation that equity crosses so many different constructs, but also felt that to begin this work, we had to do it in a targeted fashion, and that we needed to have some targeted conversations, and that race and disability were the first two for us to start at, and we collectively agreed to as a division. And then we also wanted to make sure, thanks, Deanna. We also wanted to make sure that as we were doing the work, we were making clear connections to the work that was already being done and happening within the division. And so there were some really obvious connections that came up at the beginning. First, I want to talk about some of the embedded equitable practices, our work with reading research and classroom practice and foundations of mathematics. In both of these courses, there is a high focus on equity. It's particularly related to aligning what we know are research-based and validated practices to individual needs of students. And as we've heard throughout the course of this meeting today, what we know is that the practices and the strategies for students who struggle are also those that are most effective for all students. So when we consider equity, we know that the work's not just relevant for students with disabilities. To complete this work with excellence, we have to consider each student, and knowing that these practices not only are effective for students with disabilities, but for all students as well. And which is why we've really promoted opportunities for folks to have access to these courses in general and special education. We've also realized in terms of the coaching continuum that professional learning is complex and hard, and to impact knowledge, belief, dispositions, but then also what happens in the classroom day to day in terms of practice is a challenging thing. And then a key feature in that is not just professional learning, but ongoing job embedded support that includes coaching. I can just think about this as a little league baseball coach, that just telling kids how to do something, giving them a book to read, giving them some examples is not going to be enough. That I would say that education is a much more complex endeavor for Little League Baseball, and the type of support that we need to provide is ensuring that they understand the why, the theory, that there's clear models of what they're doing, that they get feedback from their practice, and then they're also able to have opportunities to talk with their peers about the effectiveness of that. And so we had the opportunity to do work around coaching with our full staff, and as a result of that, I think that's going to positively impact the work that we're able to do with equity, because we know that this is going to be, as Sherry said, this is work that's going to continually be ongoing within our division. We're also fortunate to collaborate with the state board on the LENS project. LENS stands for Learning for Equity, a Network of Solutions. As I talked about earlier, We decided as a division, as a result of the assessment that we did, to focus on race and disability. And this particular project is really aligned to the intersection of these two. So we are required to report data to OSEP, the Office of Special Education Programs, related to significant disproportionality. So I want to talk briefly about what those things are related to. When we're referring to special education outcomes that are related to significant disproportionality, we look at data that are disaggregated by race and by disability. And there's three major areas that we look at. The first of that is discipline. And what we know, not only from data in North Carolina, but empirical data across the country, is that students of color, that's all students as well as students with disability, are generally disciplined more harshly in regard to discipline outcomes like short-term suspension and long-term suspensions. There's also empirical data to suggest that students of color, even when the behavior is the exact same as their white classmates, receive a harsher disciplinary action. So as we think about the definition of removing of equity and our need to remove barriers, this is a really clear target that we need to focus on to remove that. Second, we also look at placement of students with disabilities. Sherry, at the beginning of the presentation, talked about the different disability categories. And for this issue, the data that we look at examines students across race and whether some students have more restrictive placements. And when we say restrictive placements, that refers to the amount of time that students are learning with non-disabled peers. And again, and I say this generally, that students of color more likely are to be placed in more restrictive places, which again is a barrier that we can focus on removing to improve opportunities. And then third, we also looked at the disability category of students that are being placed in. And unfortunately, the trend continues. And here we see that students of color are generally being placed more frequently in categories of intellectual disability and serious emotional disability, which oftentimes restricts that placement as well. And so what I want to say that I'm really excited and happy about the lens work as we try to target what these are clear barriers to learning, is that we have multidisciplinary teams that are engaged in this work. This includes school administrators, district administrators, general and special education staff. And I think that that's critically important to say, because this is an issue that's much broader than just special education. There are a whole host of complexities that lead to this type of significant disproportionality and disparities that we see over the course of these three areas. And so we've got what we're doing with this work is really focusing on systemic ways to determine root causes for what could be causing this disproportionality, making sure that we have evidence-based practices that are aligned to those root causes. There's a lot of really good things going on across the state that we want to make sure that we're able to scale effectively, and also work on unconscious bias. And so really excited about the work that's happening there and the alignment to the goals. I know that the social emotional learning state team provided an update previously at a board meeting, but I also want to say that this is work that we're supporting and contributing to, and feel that this is the work there is looking through a lens of equity. Again, it's multidisciplinary in nature. It ensures that the needs of the whole student are met, not just academics. There's really clear evidence that the competencies that our national organization, CASEL, has defined lead to better outcomes for all students when they are embedded within all instruction. It doesn't necessarily have to be a separate lesson or a separate piece of support, but if it's embedded over the course of the day. We also have Project Aware, which is a grant that we have through SAMHSA. Specifically around that, we are working. One of the main goals of that is to ensure that students who have had disparate access to mental health are able to receive better access to that. And that's the goal of that, is to ensure that we increase that opportunity. And then also working with, as I said previously, knowing that all aspects and whole child are taken care of. I'm going to talk briefly about our goals. Our goals are aligned. And Deanna, if you can go to the next slide. Thanks. We decided to focus our strategic plan on the same 4 goals as the state board, and we, as Sherry said, we added one more. The first is eliminating opportunity gaps, and we created specific objectives that we felt would be most critical to our division. And I'm not going to read through all of these, but want to say that one of the main things that we wanted to do is decrease the proportion of low-performing PSUs that are identified based on exceptional children and the program subpopulation. We want to make sure that we, as I just said, decrease practices resulting in significant disproportionality. We're going to continue to collaborate with other divisions. Thanks, Dina. Sorry. One of the other things that we really wanted to focus on as well is increasing support for early career staff. So this is first and second year teachers. One of the things that we know is that those folks are have a much higher probability of having attrition and not staying within the field. And we know that that's particularly relevant for hard staff districts, which leads to further inequity. And so that's been a big focus over the course of our work this year, is to ensure that we're able to retain teachers. Our second goal is to improve district and school performance by 2026. The main objectives related to this are to continue to develop and provide universal support to LEAs, as well as more customized professional development to EC programs, as we see that through a number of different data sources that we have. We also want to make sure that we maintain our coherent monitoring strategies. We also know that as a result of this, we can increase students with disabilities proficiency in pre-math and math skills, and increase students with disabilities proficiency in pre-reading and reading skills.
Thanks, Matt. I'm going to pick up with our goal 3, which again aligns with State Board and the increasing the educator preparedness to meet the needs of every student. And just some highlights there is ensuring that we are continuing to provide our staff with the appropriate toolkits, with the appropriate skill set, with increasing their knowledge and their level of comfort so that they have the tools and the supports they need as they go out to provide technical assistance to our public school units. And Matt mentioned the coaching training that we all went through as a division back. We started really last spring. COVID was a good time to have some time to do some book reading and to do some discussions. And so just giving them extra skill sets that they need or enhancing their skills so that they feel comfortable providing that support. We want to continue to support our EC directors, our leaders in both our traditional and our charter schools. There is, we talk about the pipeline of new teachers being limited, but there's a huge turnover in every state with EC district leadership. And so trying to help build sustainability and contingency plans so that we are continuing to grow those leaders at the local level is going to be critical for us as part of this plan. We also want to continue to support, as Matt said, those new and career teachers, trying to work on some recruitment and retention projects and helping support that whole initiative for the agency, as well as the relationship with our institutes of higher ed and many facets that we do, from their teacher programs to some of the curriculum programs that we help support through their work. And then finally, goal 4 is the one that we've added that's different. We really focus on collaboration. We've tried really hard to make that a standing point in our division. We've experienced already engaging with authentic stakeholders prior to initiatives and how effective and game-changing that is to get those clear, authentic voices to the table prior to any initiative that we institute. Any policy changes we make, it helps facilitate communication. So we just want to continue to build on that and enhance that so that we're doing this in a uniform manner with all of our initiatives in the division. And we also have to make sure there's that requirement we meet for authentic stakeholder engagement from the federal level in our regulations. Next slide. I mentioned stakeholder input, and one of those came from a parent who said, "You've explained all the terms or all the titles, but I still don't know what that means. Can you provide information on what these things are?" So we've just given you a snapshot, but at the end of our strategic plan that I believe you've received in your materials, there is a page, about a page and a half of a glossary of terminology. And this is just to help all readers understanding, giving them better clarity. We even put a cool little tool in there so if you, on the strategic plan, if you hover over those terms, the definition will pop up as well. We're trying to make this user-friendly, in other words, so that the public understands our focus and our goals.
And I'm going to talk briefly about our next steps. This strategic plan obviously is not just something that we're going to do once and not come back to frequently. Deanna, if you can go to the next slide, please. And so we have different sections within the division that have different priorities of work. And as we use this as a large guiding plan for that we do, we also want to ensure that they were able to make clear connections to the work that they were doing. So what we've asked within each of our divisions is that they move forward and create their own activities, but not only that, what their metrics of evidence will be that the work is being effective. And so we've developed quarterly timelines once we complete all of these and get feedback and ensure that we all feel comfortable with our session plans, that we have very clear, actionable metrics to be able to look at this at a quarterly basis and ensure that the work that we are applying to this is having an impact. And when I say impact, it's not just an impact on thoughts and dispositions, but also practices. Are we actually making things more equitable for students across the state? So I think I mentioned this. We will review those evidences quarterly. And then also we're going to do an annual review of our division strategic plan, look at all of the large goals that we have, as well as the section goals, see how the section goals are contributing to the larger goals that we have. And we want to make sure that we are engaging in a plan, do, study, act process where we know that this isn't a one-time thing, that we want to continuously improve, continuously collect and analyze data and make changes in response to the data that we're seeing and analyzing.
And Matt, if I could add to that, our goal is also to connect our evidence of practice back to the state board's strategic plan through some vehicle, be that a dashboard or other means, just so that we can continue to know that we are supporting the work of the board and the state superintendent.
Sherry.
And I think we're going to turn it back over to Dr. Edmonds.
And I would like to say thank you again to Sherry, Matt, and the team for their very, very thoughtful approach and development of the strategic plan, ensuring alignment with the State Board of Education goals and State Superintendent Truitt's North Star, and using the data and core equity questions to drive the work. So thank you again for your hard work. And at this time, the team will take any questions that the board may have.
Board members?
Mr. Ford, I have a quick question.
Absolutely, Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you so much. Great presentation, a very good information. My question is, this can go to Ms. Thomas or to Matthew. I'm wondering on this issue around disproportionality. I'm thinking specifically about students who are referred to ISS or out of school, or whatever the consequence might be. Aren't there some guardrails already embedded in EC policy, federal laws, that would pay attention and prevent that from being the case? I'm saying nothing's perfect, but
right,
aren't there some
there are, and I'll start and then invite Matt to add anything to this. There are requirements, and one of those is actually pretty rigid, in that any district who has been deemed disproportionate for 3 years must set aside 15% of their federal IDEA funding to address the disproportionality, the significant disproportionality. That piece of federal regulation changed a couple of years ago. Previously, those funds could only be used for activities for students who had not been identified. They recognized that that's not really solving the problem. And so now either students with an IEP or students without an IEP could receive those services. It's something we monitor from the division. It is something that is not a choice. It is a requirement, and our districts work really hard to get out of that status of being significantly disproportionate. It kind of ebbs and flows in the numbers we see. We start with a warning list, which gives districts a chance to do to set aside those 15% of funding if they so choose, and start targeting or addressing the problem. But when they reach that status, then they must set aside those funds. And districts are working really hard to get out of that status. Matt mentioned the Arise project that we are doing within the Lens project with the state board. And we've had some districts in that work group with us who have come out of the requirement of setting aside that funding and done some really nice work and are sharing that across the state. And our plan with that project is to really use those as exemplars to help other districts figure out how to get out of that status of significant disproportionality.
And Sherry, the only other thing that I would add is there's also, as a result of IDEA and statute, that in terms of suspensions of students with disabilities, once they exceed a particular limit, there has to be what's referred to as a manifestation determination to see whether the behavioral issues are the result of a disability, and an IEP team has to come together and make that determination.
Thank you very much. Matt, you touched on the thought that was uppermost in my mind, and I could not get the term manifestation. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Ford, this is the superintendent.
Superintendent Truitt.
Thank you. Thank you all for this presentation. So my question is similar to Dr. Oxendine's. I'm hoping you can define for me exactly what we're talking about when we use the term disproportionality as it is used in Goal 1, Objective 2. Are we only talking about instances of suspension as they relate to exceptional children, or other types of disproportionality?
Matt, do you want to go or do you want me to take that one?
You can go ahead, and I'm happy to follow up with anything.
Sure. So in IDEA, significant disproportionality is defined under 3 areas. Either the discipline piece that Matt went into kind of depth with the area of disability. So are districts identifying students of color as intellectually disabled or emotionally disabled rather than learning disabled? And then are those students being identified again by color, placed in a more restrictive environment, a self-contained setting rather than a inclusive setting within the school? So are they being disproportionately set apart in some ways in those 3 areas: discipline, eligibility category, or the level of service they're receiving? That's the definition within IDEA.
Thank you. So I have a follow-up question then, Mr. Ford.
Absolutely.
So do we have data that tells us the disproportionality of, or maybe what could also be called identification of students who are SLP, who are Black and Brown or low income?
Yes, we do a child count twice yearly. The December 1 count is done for federal requirements. The April 1 count is done for state requirements, and it generates our, for lack of a better word, the child count number for our funding with our IDEA and our state EC dollars. And so we can break that down by age, by category, and by level of service, actually.
So would it be possible for Sherry, for your team and me to discuss what that disproportionality looks like?
Absolutely.
And I'm also interested to know, I know from our own data that we are not, that we are over-identifying older children as dyslexic when possibly they have just not received adequate early literacy instruction. So right now we are identifying about 373 6-year-olds as dyslexic, and that number by age 14 jumps to 7,227. We need to ensure that we have early identification practices in our districts for dyslexia. And I need to understand how we can best support districts in ensuring that timely, proper identification is occurring that is not disproportionate.
So a couple of pieces there. In the last reauthorization of IDEA, which was in 2004, that is when the shift changed, not requiring a determination of SLD by using a discrepancy model. So comparing the IQ of a student or the ability of a student to their actual achievement level, and
Yes.
instead moved us back to looking at their response to intervention. Students that fall 8 years old and under can fall under the category of developmentally delayed. It's one of the 14 areas of disability that are approved, that are in North Carolina and approved by IDEA. And a student may fall under that category because they've not been exposed to instruction at that point. They've not been in preschool, they've not been anywhere except at home, and they come into school without those pre-literacy skills. And to put a label sometimes of an SLD is very difficult on a 5 and 6 and even 7-year-old if they've not been exposed to that instruction. And many times those children fall under the category then of developmentally delayed because there are other factors showing up. There may be speech problems, there may be motor problems. And so that is not to say they're not getting adequate reading instruction. It's just they haven't reached a level where they meet the eligibility criteria for SLD. And each of our areas of disability in our policies contain the requirements, the things that need to be met. And that's really protection to ensure we're not over-identifying at a young age either. With response to intervention, I feel like we get a better feel for what that student can and cannot do and has not been exposed to, as opposed to giving them a normed easel test where they could guess at 4 squares and get the right answer, but really not understand what they're really responding to.
Yeah, I so appreciate that response. I think if I could just be more specific, my concern when I talk about adequate early literacy instruction is directly related to our current inability to ensure that all children are reading proficiently in North Carolina. And so when we look at low income Hispanic and African American students' reading proficiency levels, which are well below white and Asian students' reading proficiency levels, they are, my fear is that because children are not reading by the time they're in 8th grade, they are not reading proficiently, they are being over-identified along the way as SLD. So whereas children with parents who are have the means and resources will find other ways outside of school to ensure that their students are learning to read, this is not always the case, resulting in a greater gap, which we see in our data. And so I want to make sure that as we are embarking on addressing the underlying cause of our inability to crack the nut on reading proficiency, not just by 3rd grade, but by 8th grade, that we are being very conscious of not over-identifying low income and students of color.
I'm going to ask Matt to respond to this because of the work we did with our SLD policy change, and his background as a school psychologist gives him the better language that I could do in describing that.
Thanks, Sherry, and really appreciate this question, Superintendent Truitt. One thing is that we've changed methodology for identification that I think has been historically biased on the use of cognitive assessments that we know yield different scores, and particularly makes it hard to identify a student early on. And so looking at response to intervention is what we know to be a more valid way to mitigate that over-identification. The second thing is the first criteria within the current policy is a rule out of lack of appropriate instruction and ensuring that all students are receiving the instruction that they need to be successful within general education. And I think it's, as what I'm hearing you say as well, as much of a civil rights violation to assume that a student has a disability because they haven't been instructed correctly. And that's the first rule out that we have within this new policy. So I'm hopeful with the work that we're doing now with the policy, but then also the implementation of the policy and the professional learning that we're providing, that this will improve some of the data that we're seeing with the concerns that you've expressed.
Excellent. And I look forward to working with you both to help me understand how we can support districts in making sure that they understand these policies and can support all of their children.
We appreciate that, and especially the advocacy for literacy. We're all on the same side of the table with that. So thank you, Superintendent.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Excellent.
Ford.
My pleasure. Board members, are there any more questions?
Yes, Mr. Ford, I have just a comment.
Chair Kamens.
It was my responsibility and my privilege to work with Mr. Ford and the other members of the team that brought the strategic plan and some of this related work to the board for approval. And I just have to say that in the process of talking about all of the pieces of the plan, it was our hope that DPI divisions would align with the state board strategic plan. And so I think it's particularly appropriate that EC division has done so first, to my knowledge, and I hope we see more divisions follow that lead.
Absolutely agreed. And it's been a pleasure to serve alongside you with this, and I would just echo those sentiments. And if I could, as we prepare to hand things back over to our chair, just thank the entire team. Thank you to Dr. Edmonds. Thank you to Matt and to Sherry for your work in narrating your process of the creation of your strategic plan, pointing out the intersections and connections between what the board has done and the nuances and the additions that have been made to the service of the EC division. I think it kind of echoes the principle of my faith tradition, and I say this with respect to all belief systems, but this idea of going from a theory to practice is the same as embodying equity and whole child in spirit and in truth, right? And so believing it, of course, and having faith, but also accompanying that with works. And so that is precisely the sort of operationalizing actualization we want to see happen with all of our departments and through our systems. And so I thank you for your efforts.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to share this with you today.
Excellent. Chairman Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Ford, and I'd like to add my appreciation to Dr. Hoskins and Ms. Thomas and the entire EC division for outlining the process that they've used to align the division's priorities to our state's education priorities as expressed in our state's strategic plan. Your example demonstrates that the more we relentlessly pursue our commitment to our state's goals and objectives, the greater impact we can have to maximize opportunity and success for all. But on a more personal note, I have to admit that your presentation resonated with me in reflecting on my own personal journey, both as an individual and as member of organizations striving to create a more equitable and just society. For instance, in slide 18, your reference to a glossary reminded me of the need for a common language and shared understanding of key terms. Slide 10, around building internal capacity, reminded me of my own journey around willingness to be honest about biases and be willing to grow and learn by listening to others who have life experiences different than my own. And then the third trait that resonated throughout the whole presentation was leadership support to taking that first difficult step and then continuing to move forward through the hard work in creating a plan like you have. And so I just want to share how much that resonated with me personally and with our objectives as an organization in moving forward. And in particular, we look forward to further updates like this. And Dr. Edmonds, we are so delighted to have you as the leader of the Office of Equity and your work beginning to influence all of the agency's divisions to develop similar plans. The recent progress reported to us in the Advanced Gifted Education Division that we received last month, and then followed by this presentation, are just two excellent examples of what we can and should achieve as we move forward together. So thank you so much. We'll now take a break until 1 o'clock and reconvene at 1 o'clock. Thank you.